Hello, everybody. That's the first thing I'm going to say is I am against this kind of heat. Welcome to week 7. Not bad, right? Next week is week 8, and then we are officially halfway done with the semester. I was thinking about something, and let me ask you this. If you have pets, who would your pets vote for? Because I'm pretty sure one of my dogs would vote one way, two of the dogs would vote another way, and I think the cat would write in like a strange, never heard of candidate. So I really want you to consider who your pets might vote for. And then the other thing is, I was walking by to DVC. Not sure if you know this, but DVC has a child development area where they do like kind of a preschool or some kind of kindergarten, right? I'm guessing it's a preschool. Anyways, I'm walking by. As I'm walking by, I hear a parent or a teacher calmly telling a kid, I know you think it's funny, but you can't call your friend Mr. Hamburger. It hurts their feelings. So, if you get any one thing from this class, I want you to get that if you call your friend Mr. Hamburger, you might hurt their feelings. All right, so week 7, let's talk about what's in it, right? You have this lecture, you have reading the rest of They Called Us Enemy. And if you look at the reading, it wants to be wrapped up by October 8th. It's not the end of the world if it takes an extra day. I just wanted to set that goal because I want us to have enough time left for the story to kind of rest and process, and it won't be that bad, right? It's 75 pages. Once you do that and watch this, you get into the main assignments for week 2, which are pre-writing assignments that culminate with a short 2-page rough draft, right? And all the pre-writing and drafts in this week, they want to revolve around the texts and things that relate that are in that helpful overview of sociological comparative essay page that's posted in the week 6 module. The final essay isn't due until October 20th, so we still have a good amount of time. So the main pre-writing that I think will be really helpful is the listing, right? So you'll see details of it in this week's module under pre-writing assignments. Why do I think this one will be particularly helpful? Because in essence, a lot of the essay is going to be based on comparisons, right? So similarities and differences between Harvest Gypsies and They Called Us Enemy, right? So if you make a list of 10 sociological related issues for each text, right, you can actually compare the list and see what's similar and see what's different. For example, you might put something like the involvement of the federal government appears in both texts, right? That would be a similarity. But you also might put, well, that is a similarity. What the federal government's role in Harvest Gypsies was different, right? So kind of contrasting then in They Called Us Enemy. Because in one story, Japanese Americans were interned, right? And they're forced into internment camps in which they cannot leave. And in the other stories or texts, well, the government might have done damage by siding with things like large agricultural. Those people were still free to leave, right? So in those lists, really think about ways in which sociological issues, right, societal issues, are similar and in which ways they are different. Above the listing assignment is a small class discussion. Please note the due date that it's asking you to just name a couple of sociological issues that you see, right? And I think that discussion will just really help us with the listing pre-writing assignment, right? Basically, all of us as a group, right? We should be able to come up with a lot of sociological issues that relate to both texts, right? So a lot of kind of little stuff, right? Then there's a 5-minute clustering exercise, right? I don't really want you to spend more than about 5 minutes on it. Just kind of a quick, get the brain flowing and see what see what comes up, right? After the pre-writing, and then there's a free write, right? That will get into a lot of explorative, hopefully, ideas and thoughts down on paper, right? Once you're done with the pre-write, just let it rest for an hour or so, and then typically you can kind of go back into them, read it over, keep the things that you think are useful or meaningful, and then just kind of chuck the rest, right? Again, in the free write, don't worry about spelling, don't worry about grammar, don't worry about the order of thought, right? In a free write, the goal is to write so freely that you can kind of get beyond these thoughts that are really kind of frontal lobe and sticking out, right? They can actually constrain us from kind of finding novel and deeper, more powerful ideas, right? And same thing with the time on the free write. I think a really effective free write can often just be 5 or 10 minutes, right? So, while not required this week, if you were feeling ambitious, you could certainly compile and make an outline of what you think your rough draft will be. We'll certainly be doing outlines coming up in the future. I often choose to write my outlines after I write my first rough drafts because my drafts help organize my thoughts a bit, right? And it makes it easier for me to outline. But it's a personal choice. I know a lot of people who write their outlines first. So it's really up to you. Whatever benefits you the most and kind of helps save you time in the long run. So the rough draft that is going to be due, it's just a 2-pager with some citations. I don't need you to have, it doesn't need to have a completely proper works cited page, but do write down the page numbers, right? And the URLs. At least keep track of them for the evidence that you're providing, right? So for these upcoming essays, having those page numbers is actually going to be really important, right? So a lot of times the evidence is not going to count if it doesn't have a page number or a proper page number in it. So, and then really the final thing is just to check the feedback on your last essay. Today and yesterday I left a lot of comments and did a lot of grading. I still have some to go, I think maybe around 5 or 6. But those I should wrap up fairly quickly, like Monday, Tuesday-ish. I think a lot of those comments, especially like kind of on broader areas, they'll be useful for these essays. So I think that's kind of it for a week. I try to set it up in a way that would, like usual, the module, we deal with it from top to bottom. Everything in there will have some kind of description and instructions. And it really won't hurt if your rough drafts are up to 24 hours late. It's not going to be a big deal. You just don't want them to be more than 24 hours late. I won't accept them after that point, and mainly because we're going to be doing peer review work, and we want to get those essays to each other with enough time for people to actually kind of do peer reviews. So, with all that said, and please at this point in the recording, if you haven't read the rest of They Called Us Enemy, this would probably be a good time to stop the recording and come back, because the rest of the lecture will make a lot more sense once you've finished with the reading. So this part I would suggest taking notes, in that I think it might save you a lot of time and make your essay easier. So I was kind of looking at some of the common themes between the two books. Right, so in both we have social structures, right? We have things like community and family. Both texts explore the importance of family and community, right? In Harvest, Gypsies, migrant families rely on each other for support and survival in kind of these really dire economic conditions. Similarly, in They Called Us Enemies, Japanese American families often work to kind of maintain a sense of togetherness and cultural identity even within the internment camps. right? Another common theme you might want to look at power dynamics, right? So government authority. All right, both texts highlight the role of the government. Sometimes it's federal, sometimes it's local, sometimes it's both in kind of shaping the characters' lives, right? Harvest Gypsies goes into a lot of the economic power wielded by local landowners, like big agriculture, and power of over kind of local authority, um, and a lot of overall neglect by the aspects of the government, right? And they called us enemy. The U.S. federal government exercises, right, an illegal, although they did not call it illegal at the time, authority through kind of this despicable internment of Japanese Americans, right? So at the government at the time, the government justified it as necessary, right? So along with government authority, right? If we're looking at power dynamics, we can also look at resistance to power dynamics, right? And I think resistance is key in both of the books, right? The migrant workers and harvest gypsies, right? How do they resist, right? What do they engage in, right? Certainly they start engaging in collective bargaining, right? Labor strikes, elements of unionization, right? Well, the internees they called us enemy. A lot of times they resist through legal challenges and kind of maintaining cultural identity and dignity, right? And I forget the name. And I forget the name. There's a form, right, in They Called Us Enemy that a lot of people are asked to sign, right? And that can be seen as an act of resistance. I'm sure you'll notice it. Third thing I wrote down is social inequalities, right? So kind of class inequality, right? And there's inequality in both. That's a similarity, but the inequality takes on different forms, right? Primarily in the Harvest Gypsies, it focuses on kind of an economic gap between wealthy landowners and impoverished workers, right? And They Called Us enemy. The highlights is more of a racial inequality and the unjust treatment of Japanese Americans during World War II, right? So, and the loss of property and home, right? And for many of these families, right, in both texts, those losses are still not recovered. You look at racial discrimination, racial prejudice, and They Called Us enemies, where Japanese Americans are in turn based pretty much solely on their ethnicity, right? Well, Harvest Gypsies primarily focuses on socioeconomic issues. It does also touch on the marginalization of certain ethnic groups within the migrant labor force. And I'm not saying that all of these things have equal weight, right? Similar themes does not mean similar weight or similar outcomes. A pound of one thing does not mean it's a pound of something else, right? So did a lot of, in terms of contrasting elements, right? You have historical context, right? So yeah, they're similar in that major events caused things to propel the way that they did, right? Harvest Gypsies is set in the Great Depression, a lot of it during the Dust Bowl or after the Dust Bowl era, focusing on economic struggles and displacement of migrant workers in the 1930s. They Called Us enemy is set during World War II, focusing on the internment of Japanese Americans following the attack on Pearl Harbor, right? So, socioeconomic versus kind of ethnic or racial issues, right? Well, both texts address sociological inequities. Harvest Gypsies primarily deals with socioeconomic disparities, right? Whereas They Called Us enemy focuses on more on racial discrimination and civil rights violations, right? Again, forms of resistance, right? They take on different shapes. You could also go into narrative style, right, of the writers. Kind of one is journalistic, right? Those were a set of journal articles, and the other one is more autobiographical, right? So, Harvest Gypsies, journalistic reports, right? Steinbeck wrote them, an account of the living and working conditions of migrant workers, primarily in the Central Valley of California. They called us Enemy as a graphic memoir, right, by George Takei, offering a personal recounting of his childhood experiences in internment camps. So I would say if you choose to highlight the differences of the narrative styles, you would need to make kind of a larger sociological point with it, right? Otherwise, it's kind of a little too obvious, right? And therefore, just kind of not as interesting in terms of critical thinking. So, and then finally, I wrote some questions that might get the sociological part of your brain interested. So, how do Harvest Gypsies and They Call Us Enemy depict the role of government authority in maintaining, perpetuating, or even excelling social inequality? In what ways do the characters in both texts resist oppression? And what are the outcomes of that resistance, right? How is the resistance different? How is it similar? Another thing I wrote down, how do the books address the theme of family and community? What's similar? What's different? And then finally, I wrote down, what are the similarities and differences in the portrayal of social class and racial discrimination in the two texts? So, yeah. You also want to leave some space for kind of thinking about yourself, right? And how you deeply are exploring and kind of analyzing the text. How do you take these two books and use their messages to critically think in the real world, right? Or in the world of now, right? Have you felt or seen instances of classism and racism? Do those things mean anything to you personally? Do they mean anything to you in terms of which you've seen loved ones or friends have to kind of go through or endure, right? So how have instances of classism or racism impacted your life or the lives of people that you love, basically? And I think you can push that out broader. How do instances of classism and racism kind of hurt the country, right? Hurt our country in general, right? And even if you want to, you can kind of get into how do you deal with it, right? In terms of classism and racism, what do you think could be done for us to create a more healthy society? So, undoubtedly, you're not going to explore all of those issues in a 4-page essay, but just I want to kind of start thinking about things that really interest you on a personal list. And my list is by no means a complete list, right? You might like one or two things that I just mentioned. You might use that as a starting point, or you might not like any of them, in which case you are absolutely free to find your own sociological issues to kind of analyze and explore. And that's about it. I hope all of you have a great week. And remember, the absolute most important thing is if you call your friend Mr. Hamburger, you might hurt their feelings. Bye for now.